Welcome to the Exam Technique series on the Science Revision Coach channel. This series is designed to support you with your exam technique so that you can show off the science knowledge and skills you have been able to recall from the Revised Science with Me series. This video is about how to answer questions on the AQA Combined Science Biology Paper 1 for higher tier for the 2022 exam series. Before we can attempt past paper exam questions on this topic, you first need to be aware of how to approach exam questions to ensure that you use the time allocated efficiently. Now, for those who've heard this before, I know you can skip forward a little bit, but for those who haven't, it's so important that you understand how to approach exam questions. So, step 1. It sounds obvious, but read the blurb of the exam question. This sets the scene of the question and gives you an opportunity to think about whether you are confident to answer the question straight away or whether you need to come back to it. If you are confident, move on to step 2. If you are not, this is the time that you need to move on to the next question and follow the steps above. Step 2. Deep read the blurb, the data, and any diagrams associated with the question. Do you understand what they are telling you? Have you noticed any patterns or anomalies? Highlight or underline any information of note and annotate as appropriate any of the key information you have noticed. You will see me do this throughout this video, and this is what I really want you to take home, is that even for me as an examiner, I have to do this in order to pull out the key information to answer the questions correctly. Step 3, read the actual question. I know it sounds really basic, but the question would have a command word in it. And if you're not familiar with the types of command words used in GCSE science exams, you can see the link on the sciencerevisioncoach.org site on the students page for a comprehensive list of the AQA command words. Step 4. Using your annotations and your knowledge and understanding, begin to answer the question. Remember, you do not have to write in detailed essays for extended response type questions. You can write using clear bullet points, labeled diagrams, in tables or flowcharts. It is advisable to use a pencil and ruler to plot and draw graphs, and especially to use a ruler for accurate measuring of data on any graphs. Use black pen to write your responses using clear scientific language and legible handwriting. Lastly, don't forget that answers from previous parts of the question may be needed in later parts of the question. So let's have a look at these questions. So, question 1. There are 2 different types of cell division. The body cells of a mosquito each contain 6 chromosomes. Figure 1 shows a body cell of a mosquito. And I can see it's got 6 chromosomes in there. And I have annotated my question recognizing that there's meiosis and mitosis. The body cells contain 6 chromosomes, so therefore gametes will contain half of that, which is 3. A body cell is also known as a somatic cell. The question A says, complete figure 2 to show the chromosomes in a cell produced by mitosis from the cell in figure 1. So mitosis, I know, produces a diploid number of chromosomes, so a full set. So it will be 6 chromosomes. So I'm basically copying the cell above. Part B, describe the similarities and differences between mitosis and meiosis. Now, I have done a video on the comparison of asexual versus sexual reproduction, which does look at mitosis and meiosis. So my answer is going to be in a table format because that's how I remember it. You can access this video here in the link above. And what you can see here are my 2 columns, mitosis, meiosis. Differences, they produce 2 daughter cells, or mitosis does. Meiosis produces 4 daughter cells. In mitosis, the daughter cells are genetically identical or clones. In meiosis, the daughter cells are genetically different. In mitosis, the daughter cells are diploid, and in meiosis, the daughter cells are haploid. So those are the differences. And then the similarities, they both start with one parent stem cell that is diploid. Both require DNA to be replicated beforehand, and both require organelles to be replicated beforehand too. And as you can see, I've got the full marks. The next question achondroplasia, which I've never heard of, is an inherited condition. Now, that's fine if I've never heard of it, because it means it's an application question, which I'm going to see a lot of those types of questions on the higher tier. So people with achondroplasia are often short in height and have short limbs. So they've given me the information that I'm going to need. Achondroplasia is caused by a gene mutation. C, describe the difference between a gene and an allele. Okay, so that's basic recall. A gene is a section of DNA that codes for a protein. An allele is a version of that gene. And I've given an example just to clarify. I know it's only 1 mark, but I just want to be sure. You have a gene for eye color, but the gene could be for blue pigment, brown or gray, etc. So all the different eye colors. Now, I've got that correct. When I've checked the mark scheme, it says alleles are different forms of the same gene. So that's the definition that they've gone by. So they've kept it very simple. That's the definition I would have had for an allele on its own, but it's because they said describe the difference between a gene and an allele, why I've gone a little bit into more detail. But obviously, this is why it's so important that you do green pen work. You go back and have a look at the mark schemes yourself and the examiner's report, because once you look at the mark scheme, you can see what their model answer is in a succinct way, and that's what you can then use to memorize. I've said this frequently in the Revise With Me series videos. Your source of information doesn't just have to be your exercise book or your revision guide. It can also be mark schemes, because the mark schemes have a really succinct way of answering some of those questions. So alleles are different forms of the same gene is also a good definition to remember. The next part of the question shows figure 3, and it shows the inheritance of an achondroplasia in one family. So this is a family pedigree diagram. There's a key, which I'm going to look at, and it's telling me that the shaded individuals have achondroplasia, and it's telling me that the ones that are not shaded don't have achondroplasia. The square boxes are individuals that are male, and the circular ones are individuals that are female. And it says achondroplasia is caused by a dominant allele. So that tells me that you only need one version of the allele to get the condition. And it says A, define the term dominant. So dominant is just a basic recall, an allele that is expressed when present in the phenotype. Or the phenotype shows the expression of the dominant allele. And a recessive would be it's masked, it either is not produced or it's masked by a dominant. It is not expressed in the phenotype. So you need to know the definitions of these keywords. So look at figure 3 for part E. Is person 3 homozygous or heterozygous for achondroplasia? So I look at person 3, which I've highlighted. I've looked at their parents and I've looked at their offspring. Now, if they are homozygous for achondroplasia, that means they have 2 dominant versions of the allele, and that would mean that all their children would have the disease or the condition. And they don't. Some of their children are unaffected. So therefore, person 3 must be heterozygous, because not all their children have achondroplasia. So they must be, or he must have a recessive allele to pass on to his offspring in order for that to happen. And as you can see, I've got those right. Part F, it says complete the Punnett square diagram to show the possible offspring of person 11 and person 12 in figure 3. So I've just copied the pedigree diagram over so that I can still have a look at it. But obviously in the exam, you'd have this on one page, so you wouldn't have to flick through. It says identify which children would have achondroplasia and would not have achondroplasia. And they've said use the symbols capital A for the dominant allele and lowercase a for the recessive allele. It is really important that you follow the key that they've given you. I have marked many exam papers where students do not use the key they've been given by the examiner, and they use a letter that doesn't have a different look in the uppercase and lowercase letters, which is pointless. So please make sure you use the information they've given you. So I'm highlighting the fact that they're asking me to look at the possible offspring of person 11 and person 12. I make some annotations on my pedigree diagram about person 11 and 12. So 11 is homozygous unaffected male, 12 is heterozygous affected female. Now that I've made those annotations, I can then input the correct genotypes into the Punnett square that they've given me. And I can see that the female is affected heterozygous, so she will have a dominant allele, capital A, and a recessive allele, lowercase a. The male is unaffected, so must be homozygous. So that's how I've got the genotypes. I've also written in the phenotypes whether they're affected with achondroplasia or not. And I've done percentages, even though they haven't asked me, but that's just the good practice I'm in. I know that I need to know the genotypes of the parents, the genotypes of the possible offspring, the phenotypes of the possible offspring, and therefore the percentages of the different phenotypes. That's normally what you see in a genetics question. And you can see I've got the 4 marks. Question 2. The table shows the number of chromosomes found in each body cell. So a body cell is a somatic cell. It's diploid of some different organisms. So it says, part A, nearly every organism on Earth has an even number of chromosomes in its body cells. Suggest why. And again, it's just a recall of a basic bit of information. And I've said so that the chromosome pairs can separate easily during cell division, whether mitosis or meiosis. And then for part B, chromosomes contain DNA molecules. Describe the function of DNA. And I've just recalled the information. DNA stores the information used to code for amino acids, which are the monomers for proteins. And again, the keywords pairs, code, amino acids. And that's where I've got my marks. For part C, again, I've copied over the table onto this slide just so we can see it all in one space, but in the exam, you will have that all on one page. It says gametes are made in the testes by meiosis. Now, I know that gametes are sex cells and they're haploid. I know that mitosis does not produce gametes. So again, I can start to look at the diagrams they've given me. I can see A is mitosis, B is not quite meiosis, and D is not quite mitosis. There's a couple of errors there, but A and C, mitosis for A and meiosis for C. So I can put C in for question C. And I can also see it says how many chromosomes will each goat gamete contain. So I look at the table, I can see the body cell chromosomes are 60 in a goat. So in a goat gamete, I would have half of that, and that will be 30. And again, you can see that I've got that right. Now, part D, I've still copied the table over so I can still see it because all of these questions are all on one page of A4. It says body cells divide by mitosis. Why is the ability of body cells to divide important? Well, the whole point is to replace damaged or dead cells so that tissues can then be repaired. Because if the tissues have damaged cells, they need to be replaced and then the tissue will be repaired as a result. Part 2, when a body cell of potato plant divides, how many chromosomes will each of the new cells contain? So potato has 44 cells in its body cells. So if a body cell undergoes mitosis, it will still have 44 chromosomes. So again, I've got those answers correct. Question 3, this question is about photosynthesis and food production. How can oxygen production be used to show the rate of photosynthesis? So I know oxygen is a product of photosynthesis. So I've said the volume of oxygen produced per unit time will indicate the rate at which photosynthesis is taking place. So I get a mark for talking about time, volume, and basically the fact that it's a rate. So I've got that correct. It's just a basic recall of what's going on in the photosynthesis required practical. Scientists investigated factors affecting the rate of photosynthesis in tomato plants. The tomato plants were growing in a commercial greenhouse in the UK during winter. The graph shows the results. Now, the fact that they've said during winter in the UK, I know they're going to need extra light and extra heat at a minimum because we have less of that during the winter. I've then highlighted the graph to show where the light intensity, which I've highlighted in blue, is actually the limiting factor. So it's where the graph has a positive gradient. So that's what I've highlighted. And then I've highlighted the bits where other factors are limiting factors, and you can see what they are with the corresponding colours on the right-hand side of the graph. The percentage of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere is 0.04%, and you should know that from your chemistry paper 1 and paper 2. Part B, name the factor that is limiting the rate of photosynthesis at point X. So that's at the point where the gradient of the graph is a positive. So therefore it must be the light intensity, because that is what is changing on the X-axis. And again, you can see I'm getting those right. Farmers growing potatoes commercially try to control the rate of photosynthesis and make maximum profit. A farmer can control the temperature and carbon dioxide concentration in a greenhouse. What is the minimum light intensity a farmer should use to get the maximum rate of photosynthesis shown in the graph above? Okay, so again, I've just imported the graph from the previous slide, but you would have access to this all on the same double page spread. And I can see that the maximum light intensity, the maximum light intensity must be 20,000, because at that point, I can see that in order to get the maximum rate of photosynthesis, and they've told me that the farmer can control the carbon dioxide and temperature. So I'm not even going to look at the lowest line, because that's when the temperature's at its warmest in the summer. I'm talking about in the winter, when I can increase the temperature and I can increase the carbon dioxide. So it must be about 20,000, because that's when we can start to make, we start to have the minimum light intensity, and we can start to make a difference. And then part D says the light intensity you gave in part C may not give the farmer maximum profit. Explain why. Well, it costs money to increase the temperature, and it costs money to increase the carbon dioxide concentration. And these extra costs may eat into the profits. They may not be recovered in the sale of the tomatoes. So for those 3 marks, I've got to mention it costs the money for the temperature and the concentration, and that cost may not be recovered. Part E, explain the results when the light intensity was 0 lux. So again, I've copied over the image from the graph because that's helpful for me to remember. It says use the diagram above, so even more reason why I have to look at the graph. So what I can see is I've got to use the word because I've got the word because in the question, and at 0 lux. So I look very carefully at 0 lux, and I can see that the rate of oxygen is actually in the negatives. It's -2, it looks like. So when light intensity was 0 lux, the rate of oxygen production was -2. This was because no oxygen is being produced when there is no light, because no photosynthesis is happening. However, respiration continues and it requires oxygen. So oxygen is depleted to negative values as a result. So you can see where I've got my 4 marks. 1 mark for talking about no oxygen being produced when there is no light. Second, because there's no photosynthesis. Third, because respiration continues 24 hours, and fourth, because oxygen is depleted as a result of that respiration. And then question 4, some animals have a single circulatory system. Part A, why is the human heart referred to as part of a dual circulatory system? And it's a memory recall question. The human heart pumps blood to the lungs and to the body at the same time. So that's my simplified version. Below is a diagram of a human heart. I've annotated it to recall what's coming in, what's coming out, and the major blood vessels. And I remember arteries take blood away from the heart. The pulmonary system is to do with the lungs, and so on. So which label shows the pulmonary vein? So because I've labeled everything, it's quite easy for me to see that it is going to be the blood vessel D. And then which blood vessel takes oxygenated blood away from the heart? I can see that it's blood vessel C. Now, when I check the mark scheme, just good to know again, the mark scheme says blood enters the body twice on each journey around the body for question 4 part A. Now that's a long-winded way of saying what I have just said. They both give the same mark, or will be credited a mark. But again, this is a reason why it's good to use the mark scheme to help you when you're learning these definitions, for example. Part D, name the blood vessels that deliver oxygen to the capillaries in the heart muscle. Now, this is the coronary blood vessels. It could be the artery, it could be the vein. Either one that you mentioned, you would get the mark for it. Pacemaker cells are a group of cells that control the heart rate. Where in the heart are the pacemaker cells located? Again, a recall question. It's the right atrium. And then part F, what type of signal is sent from the pacemaker cells to the heart muscle? And it's an electrical signal. So again, a basic recall question. In a scientific investigation, over 44,000 men were monitored for 12 years. The men were divided into 4 groups based on their number of hours of physical activity they did per week. The results are shown in the table. So I'm going to have a look at that table in quite a little bit of detail. I can see the 4 groups. I can see they looked at physical activity, who smokes, cholesterol, family history of heart disease, mean percentage of fat in diet, number of cases of heart disease. So quite a number of risk factors. And then part G says, give 2 other factors which may affect the risk of heart disease, and you should not refer to the factors shown in the table. So you really got to think, what other risk factors are there? And I've just said alcohol consumption and age. There are lots of other things to think about though as well, or to consider. And again, you can see I've got the marks for that. And now we've got the big question. Part H, a 6 marker, and it says evaluate whether the data shows that increased hours of physical activity reduces the risk of heart disease. So that's quite a big question. So again, I've copied the table over so I can see the data a little bit more clearly. I've highlighted the key row that they're basically asking me to see if that has an effect on the heart disease. So if you like, that's almost like my independent variable. So that's what I'm looking at, I'm changing, and I'm seeing what the dependent variable, the number of cases of heart disease are. So I've annotated the question because they've used the command word evaluate. I need to have a judgment. So I need to have a conclusion, a summary sentence to say what I think the data shows. Does it basically, do I agree that increased physical activity does reduce the risk of heart disease or not? And I've just also added correlation and a causal link. So I'm trying to see if there is a correlation between those two, and if so, is there a causal link? And that's what I'm trying to evaluate. So before I write anything in my essay, I'm going to really deeply annotate the table, and I can see that the number of cases of heart disease increases as decreases as the number of physical activity per week increases. So there is a correlation, and you can see I've put highest risk to lowest risk for that. And I can also see a correlation between mean percentage of fat in the diet, but it's a very small correlation. So the highest fat for the highest risks of heart disease is 34, and the percentage fat in those who have the lowest risk is only 30. So it's not a massive difference, but it's a slight correlation. I can also see that with the high cholesterol and the history of heart disease, there isn't really any correlation at all. And those who smoke, there seems to be quite a reasonable correlation. So excuse the fact that my writing animation has started from the middle and not from the start. I don't know why that is the case. I'm sure somebody could let me know. However, now that I've finished looking at my table and annotating it, you can see what I have written. The data shows that the mean number of hours of physical activity, and I've just taken that from the table, is correlated with the number of cases of heart disease. So that's the first point. As physical activity increases, cases of heart disease increase. My second point. High cholesterol and family history of heart disease are not significant according to this data. Third point, there is a small correlation with mean percentage of fat in diet. My fourth point, the higher the fat, the higher the cases of heart disease, but this could be linked to physical activity. So I'm highlighting the fact that that data could be linked by other things. However, smoking seems to also have a significant correlation to heart disease. That's my fifth point. To conclude, that's my judgment. increased hours of physical activity shows decrease in heart disease with a reduction in smoking. So I've added the fact that I can see that smoking has an impact. And as a result of that, if I look at the mark scheme, to get a level 3, which is 6 marks, it says a judgment strongly linked and logically supported by the evidence. And obviously all the evidence I've listed comes from the table because I annotated and looked at the table very carefully. Hopefully, you can see how important it is to read and annotate the blurb in the question and all the information that is supplied in the question in order for you to be able to answer it with the best possible knowledge. I also hope that you can see that in the higher tier paper, there is still a range of information that you need to memorize and you need to be able to recall. And so the revised Science with Me playlist has a lot of videos that will help you to make interactive revision tools to help you with this. Now, even though you've only got a few more days until your biology paper 1 exam, you can still make a difference by doing some of this basic revision. Just also to remind you, all the topics I have the exam questions I've put in this paper have come from the advanced information topics that AQA have specified in their advanced information document. So at this point, I'm going to ask you again if you can please subscribe and like and share this video